So let's dive into a classic American story. But maybe one you haven't heard told quite like this. It's a story all about ambition, innovation, and, well, ultimately monopoly. This is the story of the National Wrestling Alliance and how a dream of cooperation turned into an empire that literally controlled an entire sport. For decades, if you talked about professional wrestling, you were talking about the NWA. It was, without a doubt, the most powerful organization in the sport's history. And on the surface, it looked like an honest group just working to make the industry better, streamlining champions, creating these protected regional territories. It really seemed like they had wrestling's best interests at heart. And that's the big question, right? That's what we're here to figure out. How did a group that was founded on this idea of partnership and fairness, how did it morph into a syndicate that would just crush anyone who dared to stand in its way? To really get why the NWA was even necessary in the first place, we've got to rewind. We have to go back to the absolute chaos that came before it. The 1940s, folks, were truly wrestling's Wild West. See, back then, just a handful of incredibly shrewd promoters held all the cards. I'm talking guys like Tom Pax in St. Louis or Paul Bowser up in Boston. These guys decided who became champion, which wrestlers got the good gigs, and where all the money went. If you were a smaller promoter, you were just left out in the cold, forced to take whatever scraps they felt like throwing your way. And as you can imagine, this did not sit well with a lot of the independent operators. A rival movement, kind of a band of outsiders, started to take shape. Promoters like Pinky George and Orville Brown, they all realized they couldn't survive on their own. Their drive to keep their own businesses afloat without having to bow down to the big shots became this really powerful motivator. And that motivation, that frustration, it led to a revolutionary idea. Instead of fighting each other for those scraps, what if they all cooperated? That simple thought was the seed that would grow into the National Wrestling Alliance. So picture this. In the gold room of the hotel president, a small group of these promoters, led by Iowa's own Pinky George, got together to forge a brand new path. They decided to call their new coalition the National Wrestling Alliance, and their whole goal was to bring some kind of order to all that chaos. Their agreement was built on a few really simple but incredibly powerful ideas. Think of them as commandments. First, they would cooperate, share their talent. Second, they would protect each other's home turf from rival promoters. Third, and this was huge, they would recognize only one world champion to bring credibility back to the sport. And finally, they would act as their own police force, their own commission, to keep wrestlers in line. The entire strategy, the real linchpin of the whole operation, was that single, unified champion. The idea was that this champion would travel from territory to territory, bringing star power and, more importantly, big money to every single member of the alliance. And their chosen guy, their standard bearer, was one of their own founders, the promoter and wrestler from Kansas, Orville Brown. But, as it so often happens, history had a massive curveball to throw. Orville Brown would never get the chance to unify those titles. Instead, that honor would fall to their biggest rival. And that's when this guy, Lou Thesz, enters the picture. Now, Thesz was the champion for the old guard, the very man the NWA was created to compete against. A huge unification match was set between him and Orville Brown to finally, once and for all, settle who the one true champion was. But then, just weeks before the match, tragedy struck. Orville Brown was in a horrible car accident that completely ended his wrestling career. Just like that, the NWA was without a champion. So what did they do? In a totally stunning, unbelievable turn of events, the alliance members voted unanimously to recognize their rival Lou Thesz as their undisputed champion. And honestly, this was probably the smartest move they could have made, because Lou Thesz, he wasn't just a performer. He was what they called a shooter, a legitimately tough, skilled wrestler who could absolutely handle himself in a real fight. His reputation was so solid that nobody, and I mean nobody, questioned his claim to that title. He brought instant, undeniable credibility to the new NWA championship. And with Thesz as their champion, did the plan work? Oh, you better believe it. This number right here, over $100,000, that was the ticket sales from a single match in 1952. That was a record-shattering amount of money at the time. The NWA wasn't just stable anymore, it was becoming a financial juggernaut. Business was absolutely booming. But you know what they say about power, right? With all that success came an immense amount of it. And that power, well, it started to corrupt the NWA's founding principles. The cooperative was about to become a cartel. Suddenly, the promise of the NWA just went right out the window. Cooperation became a mandate to crush any promoter who wasn't a member. Protecting talent turned into a system for blacklisting any wrestler who dared to step out of line. And that noble goal of bettering the sport, it got replaced by strong-arm tactics like locking arenas into exclusive deals and straight-up intimidating rivals. Historian Tim Hornbaker really puts it perfectly. He says the alliance was full of members who would defend their good intentions in public, but behind the scenes, they had absolutely no problem using malicious tactics to maintain their grip on the industry. So how'd they do it? How'd they keep that iron grip? Well, it was a whole system. They controlled the best wrestlers with contracts and the constant threat of suspension. They'd use their political influence to make sure rival outlaw promoters couldn't even get a license. And if a rival show did manage to pop up, they'd just run a bigger NWA show on the very same night to kill their ticket sales. It was a systematic suffocation of any and all competition. So by the mid-1950s, the NWA was this untouchable empire. But when you get that powerful, when you're on top of the world, you tend to get noticed, and not always by people you want noticing you. I mean, it's hard to overstate just how huge the NWA was at its peak. We're talking from the US to Canada, down to Mexico. Nearly every single major wrestling territory was controlled by an NWA member. They were the undisputed kings of what was then a $25 million a year industry. And yep, that's when the federal government stepped in. After years and years of complaints from promoters who'd been pushed out and wrestlers who'd been blacklisted, the Department of Justice launched a full-blown antitrust investigation into the NWA, accusing it of being an illegal monopoly. The empire was finally facing a reckoning. And that really brings us to the central question of the NWA's whole legacy, doesn't it? Were they a necessary evil, a group that brought order and legitimacy to an industry that was just pure chaos, making it more successful than ever? Or were they simply a cartel that stifled any kind of innovation and strangled anyone who dared to compete? It's a debate that even all these years later still rages on.